Good afternoon, everyone. Today we ask a question that lies at the heart of political philosophy. Should ethical judgments be intertwined with political ones? To answer it, we must first be clear on what we mean. Ethical judgments are decisions grounded in moral reasoning, ideas of right and wrong, justice and injustice. Political judgments, by contrast, concern the exercise of power, the crafting of policy, and the pursuit of collective goals. The tension between the two is as old as politics itself. Politics without ethics leads to tyranny and corruption. Conversely, ethics without political action causes paralysis, hypocrisy, and instability. As the affirmative today, Nuria and I contend that politics must be guided by ethical judgment, because without morality, the exercise of power loses legitimacy, erodes public trust, and abandons the very pursuit of justice that gives political life its purpose. I'll begin by showing that politics at its core is the pursuit of justice, and that without ethical grounding, it loses all legitimacy. Nuria will extend our position with contemporary examples. Politics without ethics is power without purpose. The true aim of politics, as a multiplicity of philosophers from Plato onwards have maintained, is the creation of a just order in which human beings can flourish, not merely as a system of control, survival, or pragmatism. To sever politics from ethics is to strip it of its moral compass and its underlying telos. In the Republic, Plato insists that rulers, the philosopher kings, must be guided by the knowledge of the good, because only those who understand justice can govern justly. Politics, then, is not a technical craft, but a moral vocation, to cultivate virtue in citizens and ensure flourishing of the community. Aristotle extends this idea in the Politics, describing the polis as a partnership aimed at achieving eudaimonia or human flourishing. For him, ethical virtue and political life are inseparable. The good citizen and the good person are one and the same. In modern philosophy, Immanuel Kant provides a similar moral foundation. He argues that political authority must always respect human beings as an end in themselves, never merely as a means. The moral law, as expressed in his categorical imperative, binds rulers no less than ordinary citizens. A government that acts unjustly, even for expedient reasons, forfeits its moral legitimacy. John Rawls, writing in the 20th century, reaffirms this connection through his concept of justice as fairness. He contends that the principles governing society must be those that free and rational persons would agree to under fair conditions. This is a profoundly ethical vision of politics, one grounded not in self-interest or survival, but in moral reciprocity and equality. Thus, ethical reasoning is not an optional ornament to politics, it is the very condition of its legitimacy. A politics without ethics might survive, but it can never be just. Without ethics, political life degenerates into manipulation and coercion. Philosophers have long recognized that politics divorced from moral reasoning loses all legitimacy. In modern democracies, ethics provides the foundation for public trust. Citizens consent to be governed not simply because the state is powerful, but because it is right. Jürgen Habermas calls this discursive legitimacy, authority grounded in reasoned moral agreement among free and equal individuals. When politics loses that ethical foundation, citizens lose trust and democracy decays into cynicism, manipulation, and populism. History warns us of the perils of amoral politics. The atrocities of totalitarian regimes, such as Nazi Germany, Stalin's Soviet Union, and Maoist China, reveal what happens when moral restraint is abandoned in the pursuit of power. Ethics serves as a check on the rationalization of cruelty in the name of progress or necessity. Ethics also sustains the moral architecture of international politics. The 20th century's human rights framework, from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to modern humanitarian law, rests on the conviction that moral norms transcend borders, times, and different cultures. Institutions such as the United Nations and International Criminal Court embody the belief that power must answer to principle, not the reverse. Without ethics, the world will regress into Hobbesian anarchy where might makes right. In contemporary politics, ethical reasoning is not an abstract idealism. It shapes the defining issues of our age. Climate policy, for instance, rests on questions of intergenerational justice. What do we owe future generations? Economic redistribution engages moral debates about fairness and opportunity. Even regulation of artificial intelligence raises ethical concerns about autonomy, responsibility, and human dignity. These are not merely technical or strategic matters, they are fundamentally moral ones. To exclude ethics from politics is to make decisions without reference to justice, truth, or humanity. As Martha Nussbaum argues in her capabilities approach, politics must secure for all individuals the substantive freedoms required for human flourishing, a profoundly ethical mandate. In short, politics gives ethics power, ethics gives politics purpose. Without moral guidance, governance becomes mere administration, efficient perhaps, but empty. To intertwine ethics with politics is to insist that power serve humanity, not the other way around. In closing, we return to the question at the heart of this debate. Should ethical judgments be intertwined with political ones? The opposition will tell you that politics is the art of the possible, that morality is a luxury unnecessary in a pragmatic world of compromise and conflict. But that argument mistakes pragmatism for principle. Ethics does not weaken politics, it grounds it. Without moral limits, politics becomes nothing more than organized power, capable of efficiency but devoid of legitimacy. From Plato's philosopher kings to Rawls' justice's fairness, the message is consistent. Politics exists not to serve itself, but to serve the good. Ethical judgment gives purpose to policy, direction to power, and humanity to governance. It is the condition of trust between citizens and state, and the line that separates leadership from tyranny. So yes, ethics and politics must be intertwined, because when power ceases to answer to morality, politics ceases to be worthy of the people it governs.
Good afternoon, my name is Finn, and together with my teammate Aya, we'll be arguing against the motion that political decision-making, whether in policy, governance, or law, should necessarily be guided by ethical or moral judgments. Should politics serve as an extension of moral philosophy, or must it remain distinct, grounded in pragmatism, stability, and collective order, rather than individual conceptions of virtue? Our opponents assert that politics must be guided by ethical judgment, reinforced by the ideals of Plato, Aristotle, and Rawls to ensure legitimacy, justice, and trust, therefore preventing political and ideological power abuses, as seen in cases such as Nazi Germany, citing modern issues via UDHR and Habermas. While we acknowledge our opponents' idealistic assertions, we strongly disagree. Despite the theoretical legitimacy, we exist in a complex, diverse world where imposing subjective ethical judgments risks division and instability. Intertwining ethical judgments with political decisions undermines governance by prioritizing fluid moral standards over pragmatic stability. My opposition's idealistic stance risks imposing outdated moral frameworks onto complex, increasingly hybrid political systems. Enforcement of such codes does not strengthen legitimacy, as they claim, but erodes pluralism and fosters instability. Consider historical moral crusades like prohibition and censorship, which only bred division and corruption rather than the justice they speak of. Today, we assert that politics demands consistency, compromise, and practical order. When politicians act as moral arbiters, they alienate diverse societies and invite exclusion. Ethical authority belongs to the public, shaping governance democratically, not to politicians' whims or interpretations. Politics must prioritize practical stability over subjective idealism. As Max Weber wrote, politics is not the art of governance through compromise, responsibility, and preservation of order. It is grounded not in purity, but pragmatism. Ethics, by contrast, are rooted in personal values and cultural belief systems, ever-shifting, contested, and shaped by context. This creates a tension. Ethics strive for the ideal, while politics must operate within reality. Conflating the two only confuses aspiration with action. Weber's ethics of responsibility underscores that political actors must be judged by the outcomes of their decisions, not merely intentions. Good intentions can have disastrous consequences if detached from accountability or practicality. Isaiah Berlin's notion of value pluralism deepens this dilemma. No single moral framework can reconcile competing values such as liberty, equality, or justice without sacrificing one to uphold the other. Politics, therefore, demands negotiation between inconsumable goods rather than blind allegiance to one moral vision. As Machiavelli reminds us, leadership often resides in the grey spaces between virtue and necessity. To govern effectively is not to reject morality, but to recognize when moral rigidity threatens stability and survival. Embedding moral ideas in politics often leads to inconsistency and division. Social morality shifts fast. Just observe the evolving views on gender identity and inclusion. While politics requires long-term consistency in law, defense, and governance, moral ideals are fluid and changing. This mismatch creates the dirty hands dilemma, where leaders are forced to make choices that ethics condemn but practically demands. Australia's offshore detention system for asylum seekers is a clear example. Ethically, it violates humanitarian principles, subjecting vulnerable people to harsh conditions, but politically, it is defended as a deterrent to prevent dangerous sea crossings and maintain border control. There are many examples of this. In Ukraine, Western governments, including Australia, the EU, and USA, negotiate with authoritarian regimes they condemn because survival and security come first. Ethics are culturally relative, and moral governance can easily slide into oppression. Religious conservatism enforcing virtue, for example. Politics must remain grounded in realism, not moral theatre. Pragmatism, not ethics, keeps systems stable. Moral absolutism fractures them. Institutionalized ethics often become coercive and polarizing, thus trapping individuals in cycles of performative virtue signaling, limiting practical political action. Moral authority, the power to decide right or wrong, belongs to the public, not politicians. In democracy, leaders derive legitimacy from contest, not moral superiority. And this falls back into Hobbes, who states that rulers maintain order, not enforce virtue, as well as Berlin, who states that no single moral code can capture all values, and reaffirmed by Weber, who says that politicians aren't saints, their duty is responsibility, not righteousness. When leaders claim moral authority, it often covers self-interest, censorship, or paternalism. Real morality should arise from civic debate, public consensus, and accountability. Top-down ethics alienates diverse societies. One side's virtue is another's vice. Ethical judgment must therefore stay in the public sphere, not in the hands of those in power. In the end, pragmatic governance must triumph over moral idealism. Ethics are too fluid to sustain the consistency politics needs, and moral authority belongs to the public to keep democracy alive. Now, as I bring my argument to a close, I would like to end by inviting my opposition to consider this question. If politics is not the pursuit of moral perfection, but the management of diverse interests in a shared reality, in a world defined by pluralism, compromise, and practical necessity, how can the rigid imposition of ethical or moral judgments ever hope to produce stable, legitimate, and effective governance? I yield my time.
Good afternoon, everyone. The question before us today: should ethical judgments be intertwined with political ones? This is a quite interesting question because it is asking us to consider whether power can ever be legitimate without moral responsibility. Before I respond to the opposite team's argument, I just want to share a quote by the famous Martin Luther Jr. King. "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." Our team's position has been clear from the start. As Simon had mentioned before, politics without ethics leads to tyranny, corruption, and conversely, ethics without political action causes paralysis, hypocrisy, and stability. So yes, ethics must inform political decision-making, and without it, politics becomes directionless, unstable, and ultimately unjust. Our opponent seems to think that politics should not be guided by ethical or moral judgments, that morality is subjective, divisive, and incompatible with political realities of government. I strongly disagree with this stance and will explain it in 2 points. Firstly, ethics provides a foundation of trust between the leaders and the public. If politicians make decisions without any moral guidance, people cannot know those decisions are fair and just. As Aristotle wrote in Nicomachean Ethics, the ultimate goal of politics is to secure eudaimonia, which means the flourishing of human life in a community. Politics then is not merely the art of survival or compromise, as Weber would suggest, but it is the pursuit of a good life together. I will give a real-life example. Take the case of Nelson Mandela in the apartheid state of South Africa. His moral commitment to equality and reconciliation guided his political decisions after the apartheid. By prioritizing ethical principles, he not only gained the trust of victims and marginalized communities, but also fostered national unity and stability in a deeply divided society. His actions, such as establishing the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, demonstrated that ethical leadership can create practical political outcomes, and that showing moral commitment and political effectiveness are not mutually exclusive, but they reinforce each other. Secondly, ethical guidance prevents the abuse of power and corruption, as Simon mentioned. History has proven us countless times that what happens when leaders ignore morality. Building on what Simon said on how ethics form the foundation of democracy, human rights, and modern governance. Democracy is not just about electional laws, it's about fairness, equality, and respect for human dignity. Without ethics, democracy is just hollow, serving power instead of people. For example, the former Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern's leadership after the Christchurch mosque attacks. Her immediate response was not driven by political gain, but by empathy and moral conviction. She led with compassion, unity, and respect, showing the world that true political strength comes from ethical leadership. Caring for human rights is not just laws on paper. They are ethical commitments that can lead to human flourishing. They declare that every person, regardless of their race, religion, and status, deserves protection, fairness, and respect. And when governments uphold these rights, they're acting ethically, turning these principles into real-world justice. My opponent also mentioned Max Weber's ethic of responsibility and how politicians must focus on outcome, not just intention. Does this mean responsibility without morals? No, it means accountability. As mentioned in Blatantly of Evil by Hannah Arendt, evil often arises from not from hatred, but from the absence of moral reflection from bureaucrats who claim they're just doing their job. We saw this in the 2003 Iraq War. Leaders justified the invasion of a nation on so-called pragmatic grounds of weapons, security, and self-interest, yet ignored the moral truth that hundreds of thousands of innocent people would lose their lives. That results were catastrophic, that led to the loss of truth and trust in global institutions. That was not political realism, but moral blindness disguised as pragmatism. The opposition also argues that ethical values are divisive, that pluralistic societies cannot agree on what is right. The argument misrepresents what democracy actually is and how it actually works. Democracy is not the rejection of ethics, it is the practice of ethics through deliberation. Hogan Heberman called this discursive legitimacy, which is the idea that public authority is justified only through open, rational dialogue among equals. When we debate policy, whether that be on human rights or anything else, we're making moral judgments about fairness and justice. I want to make it clear, stability without justice is not peace, it's repression. After the fall of Kabul, Afghanistan in 2021, the Taliban, which is now the government, promised to bring stability and order to the country. But what kind of order silences women, censors journalists, and rules through fee? Afghan girls are banned from attending schools, journalists are arrested from speaking the truth, and ordinary citizens live under the constant threat of violence. This is not stability, but very definition of absence of moral responsibility. The world watched as years of progress in human rights collapsed overnight, showing us that when politics is stripped of ethics, power becomes nothing more than oppression dressed as order. Real stability can never exist, as our opponent mentioned. If people are being denied their dignity and basic human rights. Politics does demand pragmatism, but that pragmatism cannot come at the expenses of justice and human dignity. Ethics is not a luxury that destabilizes politics. It is what really anchors it. Without ethical restraint, political powers risk becoming coercive, exclusionary, and self-destructive.
Good afternoon to those who are curious and share a curiosity for the niche elements within the world of political philosophy. What we are really interested in delving into today is whether politics, a network of governance established to exercise power, manage conflict, and nationalism, be dictated by ever-changing and subjective ethical standards. To announce that my personal philosophical political views align with this statement would be inaccurate. Politics is an artistic mechanism that must remain grounded in pragmatism, and rather not guided by ethical principles. This is justified through the fact that as soon as we transition politics into a morally focused agenda, we trade our last remaining facets of rationality and governance for a theatre of ethical pretense. As the keen observer of political pragmatism, Machiavelli advised the prince, a ruler must learn not how to be good and use this knowledge when necessary. This particular statement of his was not intended to suggest that leaders should or must act immorally, but rather that successful politics is backed by decisions that are not justifiable by the notion of ethics alone. From a philosophically political point of view, at the heart of politics, it is the art of what can be possible rather than the idea of it being ideal. To begin my argument, cultural relativism is a particular notion worth discussing. A common misconception is that ethics is deemed as universal. Ethics are rather shaped by religion, culture, and heritage, as well as history. Moral standards accepted by one society may be viewed as unethical in another. A prime example is the fact that Western society may be notorious in depicting human rights as ethical obligations. However, these notions were exercised within the wars in both Iraq and Afghanistan, to which were allegedly titled as ethical liberation. Instead of achieving peaceful grounds between states, the result was rather years of amplified hostility and instability of life. This serves as a clear illustration of moralizing politics proven ineffective. In a similar manner, prohibition in the 1920s should be regarded. Architect of the law, motivated by the moral assumption that alcohol is corruptive, was outright illegalized. The result of this calculated and morally motivated move: criminal networks, corruption, and the expansion and prevalence of black markets. The intent to establish a system upon morals that resulted in political instability. Renowned philosopher John Stuart Mill, an advocate of individual autonomy and liberty, expressed his valid concern of imposing one's morality by statutory authority. He emphasizes, over himself, over his own body and mind, the individual is sovereign. The moment politics evolves into an instrument of moral enforcement, it inhibits one's sense of identity, of individual sovereignty, and suppresses diversity of thought. We can analyze this notion through the perspective of a realist and economic lens. The globe functions on the sense of interests rather than ideals. More strikingly, nation-states that emphasize the integralness of morality associated with unethical regimes, trading oil and conducting transactions with dictatorships, establishing treaties and relationships with states that breach fundamental rights because self-preservation and stability should be manifested prior to sentiment. This is not hypocrisy. This is political pragmatism. Most notably, Hans Morgenthau, political philosopher, said, "Politics is governed by objective laws rooted in human nature." In essence, political figures are left to address the world as it is and not as they dream of it being. As a final point, we will delve into the notions of shifting morality and instability. The evolution of ethics is at an all-time rapid rate. A prime example is the way social constructs on gender, racial depictions, and speech have been revolutionized in the span of a single decade. Alternatively, politics is to provide consistency over an extended period of time. Had political influences and statute been altered to suit every arising moral opinion, governance will fall into a motion of turmoil. Philosophers have notably labeled this as the dirty hands problem. One of the most fundamental requirements to back politics is compromise, and oftentimes situations and choices made that bring about inconvenience. This element is not due to the fact that leaders may lack a sense of ethics, but rather because of conflicting priorities. As we draw this argument to a close, politics operates at its peak as a balancing mechanism rather than a moral compass. Ethics should be implemented in an attempt to enlighten and educate our humanity, not govern our policy. It is indeed the moral regulation of political affairs that binds us to complexity, fosters hypocrisy, and overall compromises the safety of the very people it seeks to shelter. Or as Machiavelli would illuminate to us, it is better to be pragmatic and effective than righteous and irrelevant.